Hello everyone and welcome back. So now that we have a clean data, let's try to visualize it. Okay, so we'll try to see it on a histogram. A histogram helps us to see the distribution of values for a single variable, right? So let's see what the FICO score looks like on a histogram. Okay, so we'll see the distribution of this FICO score. Let's do that. So we have already imported pandas and matplotlib earlier. If you haven't, we need to import that. Okay, and then plt.figure, we'll be using the loans data that we created here. Okay, pd.read csv, let me just copy this, command C, command V. So we have our loans data, and then we'll plot the FICO score. Okay, so let's say we have our loans, and then we just pass FICO score, and then let me save that in a variable. Let's say FICO. Okay, and then I'll print a histogram of this FICO score. So FICO.histogram. Okay, histogram, FICO.hist, and let's pass beans. Let's use 20. Okay, let's run it. So this is a histogram of the FICO score. Okay, and from the graph we see that the distribution is not a normal distribution. Normal distribution is usually like a bell curve, right? So it's different than a normal distribution. Okay, and we know that our credit score, FICO score, is one of the most important factors for borrowing money. That's why we're looking at the FICO score. Okay, so from this graph we see that, from this histogram we see that the distribution is not normal distribution, which means there are some other factors that are influencing our borrowing. Okay, so it's not only FICO score that has an effect on our borrowing. So there are some other factors. That's why the shape is a little bit distorted compared to a normal distribution curve. Okay, next we'll have a box plot, and that will allow us to see if there are any other factors that have influence on this borrowing. Okay, let's do that. We have plt.figure, and then we have our loan.csv file. Okay, and then let's plot a box plot. Okay, so for that I have my loans that box plot, and let's see a box plot of interest rate and FICO score. So interest that rate and FICO score, FICO.score. Okay, and let's store that in a variable called x. Okay, and next let's label our axis. We'll label our x and y axis. We'll label our x-axis as the FICO score and y-axis as the interest rate. Let's do that. So we have our x, which is our box plot, we'll use the set x and y label methods. Okay, so set x label, we call that on our box plot, and then whatever name we want for that. Let's say FICO score, and let's do the same for our y label. X dot set y label, it's the interest rate in percentage. Okay, and if we want, we can also set title by passing the set title method. Okay, this is the method set title. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it like this and see what my box plot looks like. Okay, so here I have my box plot. FICO score on the x-axis and interest rate on the y-axis. Let me zoom in. Here on the x-axis, you can't see the FICO scores very much, right? Basically it goes, let's say some number 630, and then 640, 650, 660. It goes on until 830. So we can modify our graph here a little bit so that we can see this box plot more clearly. We can see this x, the labels on our x-axis. Let's do that. So for that, we'll use the set x tick labels method. Okay, so I can call my box plot x and then call the set x tick labels method. Okay, that's the method name, and then we just pass a list of what label we want. So for instance, we can start with 630, maybe 630. Okay, and then we can have a space in between, and then let's do 660. Then we can have a space. So I'm incrementing 30 each time. So 690. That's the credit score, the FICO score. A space, and then 720. Okay, and then we have a space. Let's have 750. A space. 780. Space. 810. And finally, let's have a space and 840. Okay, I think that should be enough for our credit score. And let's make our space 2 characters wide. Okay. Let's see our box plot now. Okay, so still it doesn't align with our points here, and in this case, basically what you have to do is add more spaces. Okay, we just need to add more spaces. So I just paused the video and then added some more space in between our FICO scores. so that it looks much better. Okay, you can do that. So here we have a box plot for our FICO scores versus interest rate, right? And I see a trend here. The trend is like it goes downward as we proceed towards the higher FICO scores, right? So it starts here and then it goes downward. So the interest rate in percentage gets lower as the FICO score gets higher, right? But if we take the same range of FICO score, let's take this range. For instance, let's say 800. So if we take this 800, there's a range between around 12% and 7%. Let's say 7 to 12. So I see given the same FICO score of 800, I see there's a range of interest rates, which is not a single value, right? So for a FICO score of 800, I see an interest rate range between 7% and 12%, right? So this means that there might be some other factors determining this interest rate given the same FICO score, right? The same FICO score. So what are these other factors that affect this interest rate besides the FICO score? Okay. So these are the important factors which we need to investigate in order to determine the interest rate, and what are the factors that influence the interest rate. Okay? So we want to look at all these factors and see how they might affect the interest rate. And there's one way to look at all of this, and it's called the scatter plot matrix. Okay? We have not seen that before, but I'll show you that. A scatter plot matrix. Okay? And this scatter plot matrix is a great way to look at multiple factors simultaneously at the same time. Okay? To see which factors influence, for instance, interest rate in this case. Okay? And this scatter plot matrix, it just consists of a grid of plots of multiple variables. And they will plot those variables against each other. That way we can see the relationship those variables have to each other. Okay? So we'll look at that next. Okay, let's see that. I have my loans, pd.read.csv, loan.csv. Okay, and I'll call the scatter matrix method, okay, to see the scatter plot matrix. So pd that scatter matrix, that's the method, and then we pass our loans object, and then we call the alpha. That's for transparency. Let's try a transparency of maybe 0.1. So alpha range from 0 to 1. And then let's pass another parameter, fixed size. And let's pass 10 by 10. And there's one more parameter, diagonal, and we'll pass histogram so that the histogram will be printed diagonally. Okay, let's run that. Okay, now I have my scatter matrix plot. Let me zoom out a little bit so that we can see the whole picture. And you can adjust this fixed size. Let's make it 8 by 8. Okay, now I think you can see. Let me zoom out a little bit. Okay, now I think it's much more visible, right? Okay, the default color is blue. Let me pass a color argument. Color is equal to red. Let's run it. Oh, we need a comma here. Let's run it again. Okay, so the histogram is plotted diagonally, and here we have interest rate, FICO score, loan length, monthly income, and loan amount, and I have the same on the y-axis. And so this scatter plot matrix, it allows us to compare the effect of each individual variable to each other, right, and to the other variables. So for our case, we don't need to consider the effect of the same variable on each other, right? Like the effect of interest rate to interest rate, we don't need that. The effect of FICO score to FICO score, we don't need that. So we don't need to consider this histograms. But we want to know the effect of, for instance, FICO score on interest rate, monthly income on interest rate, and so on. So we'll focus on that. And the way we read the scatter matrix plot is, for instance, if I want to compare loan amount, the effect of loan amount and FICO score, I just go to loan amount and then FICO score. Okay? And then I will consider this figure. Okay. From here, just by looking at this, I can tell that there's a linear relationship here, right? And there's also a linear relationship here. Especially here, I can see it. That's for, if we consider FICO score and interest rate, I see a very linear relationship, right? You can see a linear trend. And these are all the scatter plots, all the stats. So there's a relationship. So what does that mean? That means a person's FICO score is an important factor in knowing the interest rate, right? In influencing the interest rate. That's why the linear relationship is very clear, this trend. And here, I see somehow, it looks linear somehow, right? So that's the relationship between loan amount and interest rate. So the loan amount also determines the interest rate or influences. Okay? And if we look at, let's say, monthly income, so monthly income and interest rate, we don't see any linear relationship, right? We can say that. And loan length, relationship between loan length and interest rate, not very clear, right? So those two factors, they don't have any linear relationship. But from what we have seen on FICO score and loan amount, we can say that based on this linear relationship, we can say that FICO score and loan amount are more of an independent variable, right? For our model, for our linear regression model. Okay. So in the next lecture, we'll do some more analysis and we'll work with FICO score and loan amount with interest rate. So we don't need to consider the other two variables, which are loan length and monthly income. Okay. So I want to introduce this scatter matrix plot. We haven't seen it before, but I want to introduce this as part of this project. Okay. And you can play around with these variables. You can change this alpha values and see the effect on your scatter matrix plot. Okay. And work around with this figure size so that you have the best fit on your notebook. So you can see the trend more now, right? So you can play around with that. Good. Now that, let's recap what we have done in the last two lectures. So we have our data. We cleaned it up a little bit so that it's more workable for our purpose. And then we looked at some visualization, histogram. We looked at this box plot and then a scatter matrix plot to see what factors might influence the interest rate. And in the next lecture, we'll do some analysis. Thank you, everyone.